The bulldozer's treads crushed the dead branches beneath them, a sound like bones snapping or high-pitched and nauseating, the kind of noise that travels straight to the back of your teeth. The massive steel blade hung suspended in the gray October air, less than 18 inches from the face of 16-year-old Sam Ryder, a face already mapped in blood. Sam's left eye had swollen completely shut. 2 ribs had cracked somewhere during the last 10 minutes of what the men with baseball bats had called a beating, though execution attempt felt closer to the truth. But his right hand still gripped the rusted handle of a spade, his knuckles bone white, and his legs were planted in the clay like 2 fence posts driven deep by a man who intended them to stay. Behind him, a mound of dirt with a hand-carved wooden cross. No headstone. No flowers. Just pack earth over a good man. Kid. The voice came from beside the bulldozer, smooth as bourbon and just as poisonous. Vance Holloway stood in a charcoal suit, a fat Cuban cigar between 2 fingers that had never done a hard day's work in their life. He looked at Sam the way a man looks at gum on the bottom of his shoe. You're going to die for a dead bum. There's nobody coming for you. Nobody cares about a vagrant's unmarked grave. Sam spit blood onto the ground. The red was bright against the pale clay. He looked at Holloway with his one working eye, and what Holloway saw there made him take a half step back before he caught himself. Long as I'm breathing, Sam said, you don't touch him. The bulldozer driver pressed the throttle. And far away, past the edge of town where the old highway met the interstate, the horizon began to shake. 3 years earlier, Sam had not yet learned the art of staying warm. He'd been 13 then, and new to the streets, if you could call 8 months of sleeping in parking garages and eating from dumpsters behind the Wendy's on Fletcher Avenue new. The social worker who'd last processed his file had closed his case with a note that read subject non-compliant with foster placement, which was bureaucratic language for, this boy kept running away because his foster father had a habit of breaking things that weren't his to break. Grayfield was not a cruel city, exactly. It was simply indifferent. The old steel town had been gutted by the 1990s and left to scar over slowly, like a wound nobody bothered to keep clean. The east side, where the rails ran and the old warehouses leaned against each other for support, was where people went when the rest of the city had stopped seeing them. You could vanish there. Most people did. Sam had found the alley behind the laundromat on Crane Street by accident, on a night in February when the temperature had dropped to 6 degrees and he was considering whether death might actually be the warmer option. The alley was partially covered by a rusted fire escape that trapped enough body heat to make the difference between sleeping and freezing, and he'd been using it for 3 weeks when he discovered he wasn't the only one. Lily was 9 years old and 63 pounds and had been living in a cardboard shelter wedged between a dumpster and the laundromat's back wall for 2 months. She'd told Sam this with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who has learned that expressing fear only invites people to exploit it. I was here first, she said. I know, Sam said. I'm not taking your spot. He'd slept 6 feet away from her, with his back to the wall, and in the morning he'd split the half-empty bag of chips he'd found in the gas station trash. After that, it was understood, he watched her back, she watched his. It wasn't friendship, exactly. It was something harder and more necessary than friendship. It was alliance. The trouble with being the protector of an underweight 9-year-old girl on the streets of Grayfield's east side was that you became a target. The east side had its own hierarchy, and at the bottom of that hierarchy were the children, and below the children were the girls, and below the girls were the girls who had no one to speak for them. Sam had been speaking for Lily for 2 years by the time he was 15, which meant he'd been in enough fights to know how to take a hit, but not enough to know how to win one. On the night that changed everything, he'd put himself between Lily and 3 adult men who decided the cardboard city behind the laundromat was theirs to own, and he'd thrown the first punch with the absolute certainty that he was about to be severely hurt. He was correct. He'd taken a boot to the ribs and a fist to the jaw and gone down hard onto the alley concrete, and he was pulling himself up for the second time when the voice came. Hey! One word. But something in the register of it, low and flat and entirely without fear, froze all three men. Arthur Briggs stepped out of the shadows at the alley's mouth. He was 65 years old, which meant 3 decades of hard living had settled into him like sediment in a riverbed. His coat was army surplus, patched at both elbows. His boots were held together partly by duct tape. His white hair was overlong and his beard the color of ash, and the hands at his sides were the biggest, most battered hands Sam had ever seen. 3 of you, Arthur said, 1 of him, and he's 15. He tilted his head slightly. Walk away. Old man, 1 of the 3 started. Arthur moved. That was the thing Sam never forgot, how fast he moved, for a man his age, for a man who walked with a slight hitch in his right knee. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't elegant. It was precise. 3 movements, and the man who'd spoken was face down on the ground, and the other 2 had decided that discretion was the superior strategy, and the alley was quiet again. Arthur turned and looked at Sam, bleeding from above his left eye, staring up at him from the ground. Get up, Arthur said. Sam got up. You've got decent instincts and terrible technique, Arthur told him. You lead with your shoulder before your fist. Telegraphs your intent. They saw it coming. Sam stared at him. You're critiquing me. I'm correcting you. There's a difference. Arthur looked at Lily, pressed against the wall with wide eyes. Is she yours? She's not anyone's, Sam said. She's with me. Something in Arthur's weathered face shifted slightly, not softened, exactly, but acknowledged. He reached into his coat and produced a foil-wrap package that turned out to be 2 granola bars and half a block of cheddar cheese, and he set them on the dumpster lid without ceremony. Eat, he said. That was how it started. Over the following months, Arthur became the fixed point around which Sam's drifting life slowly organized itself. The old veteran knew the East Side like a man who had mapped it with his own footsteps, which he had, across 3 winters of sleeping rough after the VA hospital discharged him and the apartment he'd rented ran out of money, because the medication that kept the nightmares manageable also made it impossible to hold down a job. Arthur was not a man who complained about these facts. He stated them when relevant and moved on, the way a man states the weather. He taught some things. Not in any formal sense, no lessons, no schedule, but in the accumulated, steady way that a craftsman passes skills to an apprentice. He taught him how to wrap his hands before a fight so the bones in his knuckles didn't grind against each other. He taught him pressure points, leverage, how to use a larger opponent's weight against him. He taught him how to read an alley for exits, how to tell which strangers were predatory and which were merely scared. He taught him other things, too. The kind that couldn't be transmitted through technique. You're angry, Arthur said to him once, on a cold March night when they were sitting at the mouth of the alley sharing a coffee Sam had gotten from the church soup kitchen 3 blocks over. That's fine. Anger is fuel. But you're using it wrong. You're burning it on things that don't matter. Like what? Like being angry about what you don't have. What was taken from you? Arthur looked at his hands. I spent 15 years being angry about what the war took from me. All that time, I could have been doing something with it. Instead I just burned. He paused. There's a difference between fighting because you're angry, and fighting because something's worth fighting for. What's the difference? The first kind, Arthur said, you'll quit when the pain gets bad enough. The second kind, you don't quit. Because quitting means the thing you're fighting for disappears. He looked at Sam. Find your thing. Then stand in front of it. No matter what. Find your thing. Then stand in front of it. Sam rolled those words around in his head for months. He was still rolling them around the morning Arthur didn't wake up. It had been a Tuesday in November, 2 months before Sam's 16th birthday, gray and cold as an old dollar bill. Sam had gone to get breakfast, 2 gas station burritos and a thermos of weak coffee, and when he came back Arthur was still. Not in the ordinary still of deep sleep, but in the other kind. The absolute, final kind that has nothing to do with rest. Sam sat with him for an hour before he moved. Then he went to find a shovel. The abandoned cemetery on the eastern edge of Grayfield had been closed to new burials for 30 years, and the city had long since stopped maintaining it. Half the headstones had fallen or been stolen, and the iron fence was more rust than metal. But the ground was consecrated, or at least it had been once, and Sam figured that had to count for something. He dug for 5 hours straight, until the hole was deep and honest, and he laid Arthur down in it wrapped in Arthur's own army surplus blanket, and he filled it in by hand. He spent 2 more hours making the cross. He carved Arthur's name into it with the tip of a penknife he'd traded a pair of socks for, Arthur Briggs. He taught me how to stand up. He pressed the cross into the fresh earth and stood back and looked at it, and for the first time since he was 8 years old, the morning his mother had dropped him at the county office and driven away, Sam Ryder cried. The black SUVs came on a Wednesday morning in the first week of October. 3 of them, glossy and identical, rolling slowly through the cracked streets of the east side like sharks through shallow water. They parked at the edge of the old cemetery, and the men who climbed out wore hard hats and clipboards and the particular expression of people who have calculated how little everything around them is worth and found the number satisfying. Sam watched from the roof of the abandoned machine shop across the street, lying flat on the tar paper with his chin propped on his forearms. He'd learned early that height was information, and information was survival. Vance Holloway got out last. Sam didn't know his name yet. He knew the type, though, he'd seen enough of them pass through the east side over the years, surveyors and investors and city planners who arrive in expensive cars and look at everything through the filter of square footage and rezoning potential. They had a particular posture, these men. Chest out, chin up, like the ground they walked on was already theirs, even if the paperwork wasn't finalized yet. Holloway was maybe 45, with silver-touch hair combed back from a face that had the deep tan of a man who spent time on boats. His suit alone probably cost more than everything in a 3-block radius. He lit a cigar while his people with clipboards moved around the cemetery, measuring and photographing and flagging. Sam watched one of the surveyors step directly over a fallen headstone without looking down. His jaw tightened. He stayed on the roof until they left. Then he climbed down and went to find Lily. She was 11 now, almost 12, and she'd acquired, over their 3 years together, a quietness that went beyond introversion. She communicated primarily in looks, a slight narrowing of her eyes for skepticism, a quick blink for surprise, a slow exhale through the nose for everything she'd learned not to say out loud. She was small for her age, with a tangle of dark hair she kept cut short with a pair of office scissors Sam had found, and she had a habit of picking up small objects, stones, screws, bottle caps, and turning them in her fingers when she was thinking. She was turning a smooth gray pebble when Sam dropped through the hatch into the basement beneath the old machine shop, which they'd been using as a base for 6 months. 2 sleeping bags, a camping lantern, a box of non-perishables, and a wall where Sam had tacked up a map of the east side with routes and safe locations marked in pencil. People were in the cemetery today, Sam said. Lily looked up. Her eyes asked the question. Developers, Sam said. The word came out like something with a bad taste. They were measuring. The pebble turned once more in her fingers. She set it down. Arthur, she said. Yeah. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Sam had told her about Arthur over months, in the spare, selective way he talked about important things, not all at once, but in pieces, like carefully handing over something fragile. She understood what Arthur's grave meant. She understood what it would mean if they touched it. Sam didn't sleep well that night. He found out Holloway's name 4 days later, when the official notices went up, taped to every light post and abandoned storefront on a 12-block radius, a city-permitted notice of redevelopment for the parcel designated Eastern Grayfield District Block 14 to 22. Which included the old cemetery. Which included the machine shop. Which included the vacant lots behind the rail yard and the informal settlement of makeshift shelters where 40 or 50 people had been living for years. Demolition begins October 17. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Property development by Holloway Group LLC. Vance Holloway, Principal. Below the official notice, someone had taped a glossy architectural rendering, a sleek shopping complex called the Eastern Gateway, all glass and steel and smiling people who looked like they'd never spent a night in their lives wondering if they'd wake up in the morning. Sam stared at the rendering for a long time. He looked at the spot on the architect's site plan where Arthur's grave would be. The shopping complex's parking lot. He moved Lily that afternoon, gathered her things and walked her 6 blocks south to the basement of St. Augustine's Episcopal, where Father Ramos ran an unofficial shelter for minors that the city pretended not to know about. Lily went without argument, which told Sam she already understood what he was going to do. At the door, she turned back. She pressed the smooth gray pebble into his palm. For luck, she said. He closed his fingers around it and walked back toward the cemetery. They came on a Monday, the way bad things always seemed to, ordinary looking until they weren't. Tommy Rash arrived first, in a flatbed truck, with 14 men. Sam knew Tommy by reputation, 22 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with the kind of face that looked permanently ready to hit something. He'd been running protection and enforcement for various East Side enterprises since he was 16, which made him, by the transitive property of the streets, a mirror image of everything Sam might have become if Arthur hadn't intervened. Tommy's men spread out through the cemetery with the casual authority of people who were getting paid to not care. They had baseball bats and lengths of heavy chain and the collective posture of men who'd done this kind of work before and found it agreeable. Behind them, grinding slowly up the access road from Fletcher Avenue, came the bulldozer. It was a Caterpillar D6, yellow as a warning sign, and it moved with the patient, indifferent weight of a thing that has never encountered anything it couldn't flatten. Sam was already there. He stood at Arthur's grave, the small mound of earth, the hand-carved wooden cross with the name barely legible now after a year of weather, and he held the rusted spade in both hands, blade down, like a staff planted in the ground. He draped his jacket over the cross to keep it dry from the morning rain. Tommy saw him immediately. He pulled up short and stared for a moment, then broke into a grin. The kind that preceded nothing good. "Kid," Tommy called, "you need to move." "No," Sam said. Tommy's grin widened. He turned back to his men and said something, and they laughed, the low, comfortable laugh of people who know what comes next and find it amusing. Sam looked at the ground in front of Arthur's grave. He raised the spade and dragged a line in the clay, a single straight groove running parallel to the mound, 3 feet in front of it. The rain had softened the earth and the line cut clean and deep. "What's he doing?" one of the men asked. "Drawing a line," another answered, and they laughed again. Tommy stopped laughing first. Something about the boy's expression, the absolute, unadorned calm in that one open eye, the way his hands on the spade were relaxed rather than white-knuckled, as if holding a weapon was simply a familiar posture, pulled at a primal instinct Tommy generally ignored. He ignored it now, too. He nodded to 2 of his men. They came in easy, the way experienced fighters approach an amateur from two sides, not rushing, giving themselves room to operate. The taller one had a baseball, but he was slapping rhythmically against his palm. Sam let them come. Arthur had taught him, when you're smaller and outnumbered, patience is your only weapon. Let them set the terms. Then break them. The one on the left, without the bat, moved first, reaching for Sam's collar. Sam let the spade drop, stepped inside the grab, drove the heel of his palm upward into the man's jaw. The crack was audible. The man sat down hard. The one with the bat swung. Sam ducked it, felt the air displacement on the back of his neck, shoved the man's arm as it came through, used the rotation, drove his elbow into the man's kidney. The bat clattered. 2 seconds. 2 men down. The clearing was silent for a moment. Then Tommy said, very quietly, all of you. They came in a wave. Sam fought with everything Arthur had given him and everything the streets had added to it. He took the first man down with a sweep that sent him crashing into a headstone fragment. He used a second man as a shield against a third, got an arm lock on a fourth that bought him enough space to breathe. He was fast and precise, and for 90 seconds he held the line. But there were 14 of them. The iron pipe caught him above the left eye. Not a full swing, a glancing blow, but enough to burst a vessel and fill his vision with red. He stumbled, kept his feet. Another hit, to the left side, and that was when the rib went, a white-hot spike of pain that turned his exhale into something between a gasp and a grunt, sharp enough to blank out everything else for one terrible second. He fell. He got up. A boot caught him in the back and he went down again, face in the wet clay, and he tasted blood and earth and iron, the mineral rawness of it filling his mouth and throat. His body was doing inventory, left eye mostly closed, 2 ribs at minimum, lip split, right palm scraped raw from the concrete's edge. He put one hand on the ground. Then the other. He pushed. He got up. What is wrong with you? One of the men said, and for the first time in the assault the voice carried something other than contempt. It carried confusion, the particular discomfort of watching someone absorb punishment that should have ended things, and keep standing. Sam planted his feet on the far side of the line he'd drawn. He retrieved the spade from where it had fallen and held it in front of him, blade forward now, the rust rough under his bloody palms. You want to touch that grave, he said, and his voice was thick with blood but steady, you go through me first. Tommy looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled the chain from his hands and swung. The chain hit Sam across the shoulders and took him down a third time. He lay in the mud with every nerve screaming and made himself breathe, 1 breath, 2, and then he grabbed the leg of the nearest man with both hands and held on. The man tried to shake him off. Sam held. Another man tried to pry his fingers loose. Sam gripped until his fingers went numb, holding on with the blind, muscular stubbornness of something that has been buried and is growing regardless. Find your thing. Stand in front of it. No matter what. They kicked him twice more before Tommy pulled them back. Sam lay on the ground with his arms spread, his body between the line and the grave, looking up at the gray October sky. He was bleeding from his scalp, his lip, his palm. His left eye was a swollen knot. Every breath was a negotiation with the broken rib, a careful calculation of how much expansion the chest could attempt without the white-hot punishment returning. But he was still on the right side of the line. Tommy stood over him, chest heaving. You're crazy, he said. You know that? You're actually crazy. Maybe, Sam said to the sky. His voice was quieter now, rougher, but still there. But I'm not moving. From somewhere on the access road, a car door closed. A moment later, footsteps, measured, unhurried, approached through the headstones. Italian leather on wet clay. Vance Holloway arrive. Holloway stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the scene with the expression of a man who has ordered an appetizer and received something disappointing. He looked at his watch. He looked at Sam on the ground. He looked at Tommy, who had the posture of a man waiting to be told he'd done something wrong. "How long has this been going on?" Holloway said. 20 minutes, maybe." Holloway breathed through his nose. He walked towards Sam at a pace that communicated nothing happening here warranted urgency. He stopped 3 feet away and looked down. Sam looked up at him. His right eye was clear and focused and deeply, quietly furious, and Holloway noted, again, that this was not the expression he was accustomed to seeing on people in this position. "Get up," Holloway said. Sam said nothing. Holloway crouched down, bringing his face level with Sam's, and the cigar smoke coming off him was sweet and sour and expensive. Up close he was older looking than at a distance. The tan couldn't hide the calculation in his eyes, the faint cruelty in the set of his mouth. "Let me explain your situation to you, son," Holloway said, pleasantly. "This property was purchased legally through the Grayfield City Council. I have permits for demolition. I have a legal right to clear this land. What you are doing is trespassing, obstruction, and, given the way you attack my employees, assault. If I call the police right now, you go to juvie." He paused. "And they still pave this field." Sam said nothing. Holloway's pleasantness thinned slightly. "You're bleeding on my property." "It's not your property yet," Sam said. "There are people buried here. That makes it protected." "Abandoned cemetery," Holloway said, drawing out the word with careful precision. "The city vacated the protection status 3 months ago. We paid the filing fees personally. Every person buried here was processed through the county historical archive. Each set of remains will be respectfully transferred to Arthur Briggs," Sam said. Holloway blinked. His name was Arthur Briggs. Sam's voice remained steady, though the effort it cost him was visible in the tightening of the muscles around his jaw. He was a Vietnam veteran. He served 2 tours. He came back and the country he fought for didn't have anywhere to put him, so he ended up here, on these streets, for the last 10 years of his life. He taught me everything I know about what it means to be a man. He doesn't have a county record. He doesn't have a transfer order. He has that." Sam's eyes moved to the cross. "I put it there. And you are not taking it." Holloway looked at the cross. He looked at Sam. He drew on his cigar, held the smoke, let it out slowly. "A dead bum," he said. "And a throwaway kid." The pleasantness was entirely gone now, replaced by something thin and honest and ugly. "Tell me, who exactly do you think is coming to help you? Who is going to see this and decide that their career, their mourning, their life is worth disrupting for a vagrant's unmarked grave and a feral 16-year-old with a god complex?" "Nobody." The answer came fast and cold and certain, the way true things do. There was nobody. There had never been anybody. That was the first fact of his life, the bedrock truth around which everything else had been built. Nobody was coming. You stood alone or you fell alone, and the only difference between those 2 outcomes was what you chose to do with your legs. He chose his legs. He put one hand on the ground. Then the other. "Son," Holloway said, with something in his voice that might, in a different context, have sounded like warning. "Stay down. For your own good." Sam pushed. He got to his knees. He got to 1 foot. He got to both feet. He was swaying. He could feel the blood from his scalp tracking down the side of his face in a thin warm line, dripping off his jaw into the clay. His left side was a solid wall of pain every time he expanded his lungs. He retrieved the spade from the ground and put it between himself and the grave, and he looked at Holloway with his one clear eye, and Holloway found he could not hold the look for very long. Holloway turned to Tommy. "The machine," he said. The bulldozer's engine note shifted. It had been idling at the edge of the clearing, patient as a waiting predator. Now the pitch rose, a deepening, grinding growl, and the enormous yellow machine began to move. Black exhaust rolled from the stack in thick, dirty clouds. The treads bit into the wet clay with a sound like breaking teeth, grinding forward. Sam looked at it coming and his body told him everything about what 14,000 pounds of steel moving at walking pace would do to him. His body was extremely clear on this point, adrenaline flooding in one last desperate tide, the ancient reflex toward self-preservation screaming in the oldest part of his brain. His legs didn't move. He stepped directly into the path of the approaching machine and faced it. The blade, the massive curved steel scoop, rose slowly at the front, leveling with his chest. He planted the spade in the earth before him and held it in both hands, and he thought about Arthur Briggs, and the February night in the alley, and granola bars split in two, and hands wrapped in cloth before a fight, and a voice saying "Find your thing, then stand in front of it." He was standing in front of it. The blade was 6 feet away. The exhaust was burning his lungs. The noise was so deep it was more physical than auditory. He could feel it in his sternum, in the broken rib, in the fillings of his back teeth. 4 feet. Sam's right hand found the gray pebble in his jacket pocket, Lily's pebble, and closed around it. He closed his right eye. He kept his feet. 3 feet. He was not going to move. And then? 2 feet. The ground shook. Not from the bulldozer. From something else. From something still too far away to see but close enough to feel through the soles of his boots, a low and rhythmic vibration traveling up through the earth with a cadence like a war drum, steady and deliberate and growing louder with a speed that didn't match anything mechanical he'd heard before. The bulldozer driver stopped the machine. In the sudden relative quiet, Sam could hear it now with his ears instead of just his bones. A sound like distant thunder that wasn't moving away. A sound getting closer with every passing second, growing from a murmur to a rumble to something that made the air pressure change, that pressed against the eardrums and the chest cavity and the back of the throat simultaneously. Holloway turned toward the road. His cigar hung from 2 fingers. Tommy had gone very still. On the horizon, where the old highway met the edge of the east side, the first headlight appeared. Then another. Then 5. Then 20. Then 100. Then. The sound arrived before they did. It came in waves, each engine note distinct at first, then layering and compounding until the air itself seemed to vibrate, until it was less a collection of sounds than a single overwhelming presence. A wall of mechanical thunder rolling across Grayfield's east side and rattling the loose glass in every abandoned window within 8 blocks. The headlights came first, a river of white light in the gray October afternoon, moving along Fletcher Avenue toward the cemetery access road in a dense, orderly column that seemed to have no end. Then the machines themselves materialized from the haze. Heavy bikes, full-size cruisers, mostly American-made, a few decades of mixed vintage between them. Custom paint and modified exhausts and chrome that caught the last light and threw it in hard silver arcs. The riders were big, most of them large even before you factored in the riding gear, in black leather cuts with the same patch on the back, a design Sam couldn't read at distance, but which contained an eagle descending over a combat helmet, and the words Iron Brotherhood MC in a semicircle, and below that, in smaller letters, Vietnam Veterans. They came in formation, not chaos. 2 abreast, maintaining distance, a column of 200 bikes that stretched back a quarter-mile onto Fletcher. They didn't accelerate or grandstand. They simply came, steady and inexorable, the way a tide comes in, and the sound that preceded them had already done the psychological work. Tommy's men broke first. They didn't run, not quite, but there was a sudden and decisive reorganization in which baseball bats were lowered and several men found important business to attend to in directions away from the incoming bikes. One man climbed the cemetery fence and kept walking. Tommy himself stayed, but Sam could see the muscles of his jaw working rapidly, the tight, high breathing of a man whose instincts were loudly recommending departure. The column reached the access road and the lead rider raised a single fist. The column's pace dropped to a crawl, then to a careful, precise stop. The bikes came to rest in a formation that encircled the entire clearing, engine by engine cutting off, until the last of the 200 had gone quiet. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Sam had ever heard. He stood between the bulldozer and Arthur's grave with the spade in his hands, blood dried on his face, left eye sealed shut, and looked at the wall of leather and chrome and lined, weathered faces that surrounded the scene on every side. 200 men. Most of them over 40, some well past 60, bodies that had been hard once and were still in the way of things built for endurance rather than appearance. Every face turned toward Sam. He didn't lower the spade. The lead bike was a Road King, flat black with no chrome, and the man who dismounted did so with the economical motion of someone who has spent so many hours on a bike that getting off is as automatic as standing up. He was enormous, 6'3" at minimum, with a chest like a boiler and forearms that strained the rolled-back sleeves of a shirt under his leather cut. He was 50-something, with gray at his temples and a beard cut close, and his face was the face of a man who had been through things that left marks and had arranged himself around those marks instead of hiding them. His cut read President above the left breast. His name patch read Big Bear. He walked through the cemetery without looking at Holloway or Tommy or the men who'd rearranged themselves along the fence. He walked directly to Sam. He stopped 4 feet away and looked at the boy for a long, quiet moment, the battered face, the blown eye, the dried blood, the hands on the spade that still hadn't released their grip. His eyes moved to the cross. Arthur Briggs. He taught me how to stand up. Big Bear read it once. He read it again. He stood very still. Behind him, Vance Holloway had recovered enough to straighten his suit jacket. He walked forward, already recalibrating. Sam could see it in his posture, the pivot from intimidator to negotiator, the practiced smoothness of a man who had dealt with obstruction before and knew which tools the situation required. "Gentlemen," Holloway said, his voice returning to its earlier register of careful pleasantness. "I understand there may be some concerns about the development plan. I want you to know that I'm willing to engage in a dialogue about any historical preservation concerns. There are processes." Big Bear turned and looked at him. Holloway stopped talking. It was not an aggressive look. It was not theatrical. It was simply the look of a man who has seen things that made Vance Holloway's particular variety of danger very small, and who was communicating this fact without exerting himself. "That man's grave," Big Bear said. He had a voice like a hand truck dragging across concrete, low, functional, built for load-bearing. "Arthur Briggs." He looked at Holloway steadily. "He was my brother. We served together in the Mekong Delta in 1969. He carried me 3 miles through triple canopy jungle with a round in my lung when I went down." He paused. "I spent 11 years looking for him after he stopped answering letters. I received his last letter 6 weeks ago." Tommy, in the background, was attempting to signal to Holloway with his eyes. Holloway was not reading the signal. "Sir," Holloway said, "I have every sympathy, but the legal status of this land." "Your machine," Big Bear said, "is pointing at a United States veteran's grave." He let that sit for 1 second, 2, 3. "I'd move it." The bulldozer driver was already out of the cab. He had not waited for instructions. He had simply looked at the semicircle of 200 motorcycle riders, looked at the distance between himself and the nearest exit, and made a private calculation that ended with him climbing down the side of the D6 and removing himself from the immediate situation. No one stopped him. No one needed to. Tommy Rash was a man of durable confidence and limited imagination, which meant he required more data before updating his threat assessment. He had the baseball bat still in his hands, though lowered to a less aggressive position, and he was running the math on whether loyalty to Holloway's pay rate outweighed the available information. Big Bear walked toward him. Tommy raised the bat. Big Bear's right hand came up and took the bat out of Tommy's grip with a motion so fast and direct it was over before Tommy had registered it happening. Then his left fist connected with Tommy's nose, not a wild swing, not a hammer blow, but a short, surgical, entirely controlled punch that broke the cartilage and put Tommy flat on his back in the wet clay with the speed of a door being closed. Big Bear stepped over him and kept walking. The remaining men with bats and chains looked at each other. The math was now clear even for the mathematically challenged. Weapons dropped. Hands went up, some of them reflexively, in the universal posture of please do not. Several of the Iron Brotherhood riders had dismounted and were moving through the space with the calm efficiency of people who do not need to hurry because the outcome is already decided. The bulldozer, now abandoned, was surrounded within 40 seconds. A rider in his 60s with a patch that read road captain climbed up into the cab, took a moment to understand the controls, and drove it backward 100 yards down the access road, where it was flanked by 4 parked bikes in a configuration that made its return problematic. Vance Holloway watched all of this with the expression of a man who has never, in his adult life, been in a room where his money did not constitute the decisive argument, and who was experiencing the cognitive dissonance of discovering that this room was different. He tried the decisive argument anyway. Do you have any idea what you're doing? His voice was still controlled, but the pleasantness had been replaced by something sharp and thin. This is private property. There are 200 of you, which means 200 counts of trespassing, plus destruction of. Big Bear reached him in 4 steps. Holloway's sentence ended when Big Bear's boot connected with the side of his right knee, not the kind of kick designed to permanently damage, but the kind designed to communicate that the option exists. Holloway went down on one knee with a sound that was part surprise and part pain, his cigar tumbling from his fingers into the mud. Big Bear crouched in front of him. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, a letter, Sam would later understand, written in the cramped and careful handwriting of a man whose hands shook in the mornings. He held it open in front of Holloway's face. He wrote this 6 weeks ago, Big Bear said quietly. From a shelter on the other side of this city. He told me about this grave. He told me about this boy. He let Holloway look at the letter for a moment, then folded it away. He asked us to check in. Said he had a feeling things might get complicated. A slight pause. Arthur was good at feelings like that. Holloway said nothing. The cemetery, Big Bear said, stays. He let that settle. Every grave, every headstone. You will file preservation paperwork with the Grayfield City Council by Friday. The Iron Brotherhood has 17 members currently serving on that council in official capacities. They will be reviewing your filing personally. He stood back up. Your development project moves west. There's a vacant industrial parcel on the other side of the rail yard that the city has been trying to move since 2019. I'm told it's a good deal. He looked down at Holloway, still on one knee in the mud, staring up at him with the expression of a man who has just had a known universe revised without his consent. And you, Big Bear said, are going to stand up, walk to that grave, and take your hat off. Holloway's jaw tightened. One of the riders behind Big Bear, a compact, weathered woman in her 50s, with sergeant's stripes embroidered on her cut, said, without inflection, I'd do it. Holloway stood up slowly. He walked to Arthur's grave. He removed his hat. He stood there in silence for 20 seconds that must have felt, Sam imagined, like a very long time. Then Big Bear turned away from him as if he no longer existed, which was, Sam would reflect later, the most complete form of dismissal he'd ever witnessed. Vance Holloway, in that moment, simply ceased to matter. Big Bear walked to Sam. Sam had not moved from his position in front of the grave. He was sitting now, cross-legged in the clay, the spade laid across his thighs, his hands resting on it. The adrenaline had finished its work, and what remained in its wake was a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical, a total, cellular depletion, as if his body had drawn on reserves he hadn't known he had and was now presenting the invoice. His face was stiffening as the blood dried. The broken rib punished every breath with a precise, focused cruelty that left no room for distraction. His right hand was still closed around Lily's pebble. Big Bear stopped in front of him and stood for a long moment, looking at him. Looking at the cross. Looking at the carved name weathered now by a full year of rain and wind, the letters Arthur's own hands had never touched, written there by the boy who'd been the last person on earth who knew the old soldier's face well enough to miss it. He crouched down. Something was happening in the big man's face, a slow, internal movement, like a glacier shifting, massive and irreversible. His eyes were very dark, and in them Sam could see something he recognized, the specific grief of a man who has lost someone they couldn't protect, carrying guilt inside it like a stone. "Arthur sent me a letter," Big Bear said. His voice was lower now, stripped of its command register. 6 weeks ago. "He told me he was sick," said the old wounds had caught up with him, the way he always figured they would. "He said he wasn't going to the hospital." He was quiet for a moment. "He also told me about you." Sam looked at him. Big Bear reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed the letter. He unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something that cannot be replaced, and read aloud in the flat, deliberate way of a man reading something that costs him to read. "There's a boy here named Sam. 16 next month. He's got no one. I know what that does to a person, and I've been trying to do what I could. He's a good one, Bear. Better than he knows. He's got the thing in him that matters, the kind that doesn't quit. I'd take it as a personal favor if you'd find him after I'm gone. He's going to need people who understand what it means to stand for something, because nobody's ever shown him that anybody stands for him." Big Bear folded the letter. Sam was not moving. His throat had closed over something, and his one open eye was doing something that, under other circumstances, he might have had the bandwidth to be embarrassed about. But he was too tired for pride right now. He was just tired, and hurt, and the sound of Arthur's words coming out of someone else's mouth was doing something to his chest that had nothing to do with the broken ribs. "He was gone before your letter could get back to him," Sam said. "I know." Big Bear looked at the cross. "I know he was." A pause. He would have hated that. He had a whole speech prepared, knowing Arthur. About proper goodbyes and not being dramatic. The corner of his mouth moved, briefly. He hated dramatic. "You know that? He told me once that sentiment was for people who hadn't done anything worth being sentimental about yet," Sam said. Big Bear looked at him sharply. Then he laughed, a short, genuine sound, nothing performed about it. "That's him," he said. "That is exactly him." The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. The 200 men of the Iron Brotherhood had moved to the perimeter of the cemetery and gone still, and in the fading October afternoon the space around Arthur's grave had a quality Sam had no precise word for: the weight of witnessed things, the accumulated presence of people who understood what it cost to be here. Big Bear stood. He reached into his cut a second time and produced something Sam didn't recognize at first, a patch, military style, the Iron Brotherhood emblem but smaller, worn at the edges with the soft sheen of something long carried. He held it for a moment, looking at it, then set it carefully on top of Arthur's grave mound. "That's Arthur's," he said. "His original patch from the charter year. He sent it back with the letter. Said it was for you, when the time came." Big Bear looked at Sam steadily. He said, "Give it to him when he earns it. He'll know when." Sam looked at the patch on the grave. His hand tightened on the spade. "He also said," Big Bear's voice dropped to something almost private, "to tell you that he knew you'd be standing there. He said he'd have bet money on it." A pause. "Said he never met anyone in 68 years worth putting money on. Until you." Sam did not trust himself to speak. Big Bear took off his own leather cut, the president's cut, heavy with patches accumulated over 30 years, and draped it across Sam's shoulders without ceremony. It was enormous on him, hanging almost to his knees, carrying the smells of road and leather and motor oil and something underneath all of that, faint and specific, like campfire and machine shop, that Sam couldn't name but somehow recognized. "You know what that means in our world," Big Bear said. "I don't belong to anything," Sam said. The words came out rougher than he intended, the knee-jerk refusal of someone who has learned that belonging is the prelude to loss. "No," Big Bear said. "You belong to us. That's different." He held Sam's gaze. "Nobody takes Arthur's people. We didn't do it for him, either. We should've looked harder, and we're not doing it again." He put a hand on Sam's shoulder, the weight of it steady and specific. "You've got a road family now. 200 of them. Anybody touches you, they touch all of us." Sam looked at the patch on the grave. He looked at the cross. He looked at the carved letters. "He taught me how to stand up. There's a girl," he said. "Lily. She's 12. She's been with me for 3 years. She doesn't have anyone either." "She's ours too," Big Bear said. "Doesn't have to ask." He said it with the finality of a man closing a ledger. It was simply a fact, retroactive and permanent, as though it had always been true and they had only just gotten around to stating it. From somewhere in the encircling ring of riders, one of the men, an older veteran with a face that had seen 2 wars and several continents, raised 2 fingers to his forehead. A salute. Then the man next to him did the same. Then the next. It moved through the circle the way a flame moves through dry grass, quick and silent, until all 200 of them were holding the gesture, 200 scarred and weathered and undefeated men, saluting a 16-year-old boy with blood on his face and a rusted spade across his lap, sitting in the mud in front of an unmarked grave. Sam had spent 16 years in a world that communicated, in every possible way, that he did not count. That the ground he occupied was empty of value. That grief was a luxury reserved for people whose losses had witnesses. He had witnesses now. He felt something release in him, not break, not collapse, but release, like a muscle that has been holding against a load for so long that the moment the load is removed, the relief itself is indistinguishable from shock. He put one hand on Arthur's grave mound and kept it there, palm flat against the cold earth, and the afternoon was very quiet around him. Big Bear waited. He was good at waiting, the kind of patient that comes from having learned, the hard way, that some things cannot be rushed and that rushing them costs more than the time saved. After a while, Sam reached out and picked up Arthur's patch from the grave. He turned it over in his hands, reading the worn embroidery, the faded colors that had once been vivid. Then he slipped it carefully into his pocket, next to Lily's gray pebble. He looked up at Big Bear. "Okay," he said. He put his hand in Big Bear's outstretched one, the enormous, battered hand of a man who had carried his brother through a jungle in 1969 and was now doing the nearest available version of the same, 35 years later, and let himself be pulled to his feet. He stood there for a moment, wearing the president's cut that hung off his shoulders like a flag over a too small pole, one eye swollen shut, blood drying on his jaw, two cracked ribs negotiating terms with every breath. He stood straight as the ribs would allow. The last thing he did before he let Big Bear lead him away was turn back and look at the cross. The hand-carved letters. The mound of clay with the single boot print that belonged to Vance Holloway, already blurring in the rain. He taught me how to stand up. He had. He still was. Sam Ryder turned toward the road. Somewhere on Fletcher Avenue, one engine started. Then another. Then 10, 20, 100, until all 200 of them roared back to life simultaneously, the Iron Brotherhood coming back to life around him with a sound like a controlled explosion, like a sunrise made of steel, filling the east side of Grayfield from the rail yards to the shuttered storefronts, rattling every loose window and vibrating every piece of rust off every old fence post within 8 blocks. This time, when the roar came up through Sam's boots and into his chest, he didn't brace against it. He let it move through him. He let it carry him. He found his thing. He stood in front of it. The rest, the family, the belonging, the future that opens like a long road when someone finally believes in you enough to point at the horizon, the rest came after. The way it always does, for the ones who don't move.